Hello. Welcome back to my podcast. I am changing the name of this podcast once again, and this whole episode is to explain why I'm doing that, why I am once again changing the name of my podcast. If you have been around for a little bit, you have probably heard of me talk about my previous podcast. My first one was Wander Well. Then after that, it was Namaste. Then I created Womanifester. Most recently, it's been Surrender, and now it is Kajeology. And this whole episode is to walk you through that transformation process. I saw a quote on Insight Timer. The quote of today for Insight Timer is, recreate yourself. Recreate yourself. A quote by Robert Greene. I have no idea who Robert Greene is, but I just thought it was absolutely on point because today is the day that I'm announcing officially that I'm recreating myself again. And here is why. When I first started my podcast in 2017, I think it was 2017, going into 2018, I batch created a bunch of different episodes, all including influencers in the wellness and travel space, because I took a course on how to grow an online business, and they said, get people who are already in your niche, collaborate with them in some way, create with them in some way, and use their existing audience to fuel your own audience. So in 2017, I had episodes with all sorts of badass women from all different areas of the world who were doing cool things in the wellness and travel space. And my podcast was called Wander Well. While I was in Costa Rica producing these episodes, I also had a number of different domains where I was kind of playing with where else I could take online businesses and blogs and that kind of thing. And I had a domain called Conscious Competitor because when I was in Costa Rica, I started working with a teenage surf professional, if you will. I was training him, we're doing yoga with him, doing workouts with him, and I thought it'd be really cool to have a brand that was all about working with teenagers, competitive teenagers, and getting their mind right, using manifestation tools in their competitions and also working with them with their bodies and strength and stretching and all those things. Well, while I had that domain, somebody reached out to me and she had the domain The Conscious Competitor. And she was like, I found your other pages and you claim to be for women and women in business, but here you are stealing my name and poaching on my business and all these things. And I was like, whoa, it is not that serious. I don't even have any content on this website. I don't even know what I'm doing with this website. Like, I'll take it down. And it really kind of scared me. And I realized there were other businesses with the name Wander Well. So I was like, okay, this scares me a little bit. Like the idea of someone reaching out and threatening me with, a lawsuit when it came to, quote, using their name. So I changed the name of my podcast to Namaste because at the time when I was living in Costa Rica, launching my business, I had a Facebook group where I was in the practice. I was literally practicing the process of creating content. By every single morning, I would get up, I would read Eastern Body, Western Mind, and I would talk about a different chakra. And so every day of the week, I would talk about a different chakra. And so I was really getting into Eastern thought and healing and all that kind of thing. So I changed the name to Namaste with KAJE. Thought it had a great ring to it. For whatever reason, I can't remember exactly why, probably because I felt it was a little bit appropriative, I decided to change that name and I wanted to get even deeper into the manifestation world. So I changed the name to Womanifester. At the time, I had an account on Instagram, which I'll circle back to this account and what it's being used for today. But I had an account on Instagram called Women Who Manifest. And it was basically a community account where you reshare other people's content and tag them. Again, it was another way to grow an audience if you don't have one. And those were really big back then, were those like women who van life and women on the road and that kind of thing. So I had a Women Who Manifest community account. And one of my good friends, Adrienne, she was like, oh, what about Womanifest? Like Women Who Manifest, Womanifest. And it's funny because I had already had that thought in my brain when she mentioned that, and it was just further validation. So I changed the name to Womanifester. And keep in mind, I'm pretty sure that all of these podcasts were different podcasts. I didn't just change the name of the existing podcast and keep it all in the same thread. Sometimes I wish I did, but every time I just kept changing the name and moving it to a whole new fresh start. So Womanifester was my longest running podcast. It ran for over 100 episodes. I had a podcast manager to help me with it. When I first got started with it, I was running Namaste and Womanifester at the same time. And then we decided just to focus on Womanifester. So that was my longest running podcast. And then in 2022, I listened to The Surrender Experiment by Michael Singer. If you've ever heard of the really popular spiritual book, Untethered Soul, he wrote that book too. Untethered Soul is a very fluffy woo-woo explanation of surrender. And then he wrote The Surrender Experiment, which is his 40-year experiment of applying the principles from the Untethered Soul. I listened to that book and it completely blew my mind. The way that he talks about, look, I'm not going to let the thoughts in my head dictate what's going to happen in my life or my decisions. I'm just going to let the flow of life bring me what's meant for me. To me, that sounded like the most beautiful feminine form manifestation where you just sit back and receive what is meant for you in this lifetime. So that ended up completely changing my approach to business and manifestation. And I stopped the Womanifester podcast and started the Surrender podcast. Here's the thing. Surrender is great. Surrender is beautiful. Surrender is powerful. And I don't feel like I'm an expert in surrender. I love the idea of it. I love the idea of sitting back and just receiving whatever the universe has planned for you and the magic that can unfold in that. And I have experienced the magic in that. But what it did was detached me from my desires. It detached me from my desires. So instead of asking for what I really, truly want in life, I took a step back and said, I'm not going to ask for what I want. I'm just going to let the universe bring it to me because I feel like the universe already knows. And sometimes the universe needs to hear you say it. It needs to hear you ask for what you want and be really, really clear that you truly believe that you deserve it. And so for the past 2 years, I've been sitting back, surrendering, and you know what that ended up leading me into was it led me away from my business. It led me away from calling in clients. It led me into bartending and baristaing and Uber driving and doing all of these things that were not my desires, but I was sitting back. I was surrendering. I was letting the universe bring me these opportunities. And I ended up in $20,000 worth of debt. I paid off a lot of that by selling my van, Love, and lowering a lot of that and getting it back to a reasonable amount that I can just chip away at over time. It is 0 interest credit card debt, to be very clear. But it just didn't feel good anymore. It didn't feel like surrender was really, truly it. And I've been sitting with this for a while, and I've been feeling uninspired to create in my podcast because I haven't fully integrated surrender as my practice, as my true way of moving throughout the world. And the way that I always taught manifestation was in 4 parts. Step 1, identify your desire. Identify what is on your heart to create. Step 2, Identify the limiting beliefs, the fears, the doubts that tell you that you can't have that. Do the shadow work with those thoughts. Really look at them and evaluate them. Are they true? Spoiler alert, they're never true. Then you move on to the light work and you install a new belief, a belief that you can have your desire, a belief that your desire is inevitable and valid. And you do that through all sorts of different light work practices that I won't get into in this particular podcast. One of them being repetition and affirmations and getting out into nature and surrounding yourself in a mastermind of people who believe in you and who are doing the things that you want to do, blah, blah, blah. And then the final step of manifestation is to surrender, to take a step back, let the universe unfold the desire through the highest timeline, through the path of least resistance, and to let it blow your mind and delight and surprise you in the process. So surrender is an aspect of manifestation, but it's not all of it. And I was trying to live my life as surrender being all of it. I love Michael Singer and I love his books, and he is a privileged white male. I am a privileged Black female, right? Like I do have a lot of privilege that I can recognize and I do appreciate. Yet there are still systemic beliefs that have been ingrained in me that I need to work through that he didn't have. There is still a lot of shadow work that I was just trying to bypass and go straight to surrender. And it didn't really work for me. So I'm backpedaling a little bit. I am getting back into my manifestation practices, actually into new manifestation practices. I just started rereading the book, Scripting the Life You Want. And I'm trying a new way of journaling my manifestations, starting with setting daily intentions, creating a belief list, and then in the morning, writing out how the day goes from there. And then he teaches to, at the end of the day, reflect back on how the day actually went. And once a week, so that's a daily practice. And then once a week on Sundays, you write out a 10-day script. So 10 days, fast forward into the future scripting, what has happened over the last 10 days. And he goes into all the details of that in his book. So I am trying something a little bit new. I am back into the manifestation game. I'm not going back to a manifester, and there's plenty of reasons for that. But instead, I am changing the podcast name to incorporate all aspects of me, all aspects of my curiosity. Because yes, I love manifestation, but I also love personal finance. I also love somatic trauma release work. I'm also in school studying Ayurveda. I also love tarot and witchy wisdom and all things related to spirituality. I have such a multifaceted interest portfolio that I wanted to create a name that was more centered around my name, and that gave me more creative freedom to just talk about whatever it is that I am curious and excited about. So I changed the name of my podcast to Kajeology. Now, this is the first time that I didn't actually start a whole new podcast from scratch. The reason for that is that I already have quite a few 5-star reviews, and I wanted to just keep that momentum going. So I just changed Surrender Podcast to Kajeology on Spotify. Soon it's going to be on iTunes and all the other listening platforms that are super popular. Now, not to confuse you, but I do have a Surrender Podcast YouTube channel. So that's youtube.com/@Surrender Podcast. That is going to stay where it is. I changed a previous podcast channel that was my Womanifester podcast channel, and I changed that to youtube.com/@Kajeology. The reason for that, again, is the momentum on my Surrender Podcast. YouTube channel, I only had 20 something subscribers. On my Womanifester YouTube channel, I had 122 subscribers and a bunch of testimonial videos, a bunch of content from the past, all related to manifestation. So I'm sending you all to that page, and that is going to be where you're going to find future Kajeology podcast episodes. Now, I mentioned a Instagram account from when I had Wander Well, and I had the Women Who Manifest community Instagram account. So on the Women Who Manifest community Instagram account, I did promote my podcast at the time, Wander Well, and I grew that account on automation. I'll briefly get into how I did that. I took a course on this process called the Instagram machine, where you basically put in Instagram accounts that are similar to yours, similar to your audience in your niche. And what it does is the Instagram machine goes in and it follows the people who are already following those accounts. So let's say I put in Manifestation Babe. I was on her podcast. Obviously, the people who follow her are going to be interested in manifestation content, personal development, etc. So let's say I put in her account. What the Instagram machine did is it would go and follow her followers. It would do like 10 every hour or so, however much it took, so that Instagram didn't flag it. And that's how I grew that account. It has over 9,000 followers on that community account. That was from me reposting other people's content and the Instagram machine. I haven't touched that account in years. I have gone in, I have deleted all the past content, and now I'm repopulating that account with Kajeology content. So if you're like, how the heck does she already have 9,000 followers on this account? Part of that is for optics. I would really like Kajeology to lean a little bit deeper into the content creator influencer realm. I would absolutely love to work with brands that pay me to create content and to promote their products on my podcast. These are all going to be products that I use and like and fully endorse, I promise you. But the higher amount of followers you have, the easier it is for you to get those types of brand deals. Obviously, engagement does matter, and I'm doing everything that I can to get engagement back up on that account and to start populating it again with Kajeology content. But just wanted to give you all the full picture of what's happening here is that, I changed Surrender Podcast on Spotify on the podcast feeds to Kajeology. I changed the previous Womanifester YouTube to Kajeology, and I changed the previous Women Who Manifest, Women Who Wander, I can't remember exactly which one it was, one of those community accounts on Instagram to Kajeology. So now, across the board, we're Kajeology. I just sent over a project to my guy on Fiverr who's going to set up the Kajeology website, connecting it to my Squarespace. He's also going to make me a Kajeology Instagram. He's also going to create me a Kajeology email account so that you can email admin@Kajeology or hello@Kajeology for future reference. All of this is getting set up right now. I don't have a domain to send you to, but it eventually will be Kajeology. I am recording this on December 28th, 2024. So by 2025, we will have Kajeology email and website up and running. Now, you might be wondering, where did Kajeology come from? So my full name is Catherine Johnita Jones. My whole life, I've gone by Katie. My family calls me Katie J. They've always called me Katie J. When I started getting into the workforce, and there are obviously tons and tons of Katies. And I should mention that my parents named me so that I would fit into a white man's world. They wanted my resume. They wanted someone to look at my resume and not know what race I am, because they had seen people get passed up because their names were too ethnic. So they intentionally gave me a white girl's name so that I can fit into a white man's world more easily. that's something that I love and appreciate about my parents, but I also feel a huge disconnect from my heritage because of my name. So anywho, when I got into the workforce and I was working with other Katies, I would often go by KAJE. One of the places that happened was at the retreat at Balcony Springs. I used to work at a retreat center in summer camp right outside of Austin. I worked with another Katie, and so they called me KAJE. And that stuck with everyone that met me in that company. Everyone that knew me from that company would call me KAJE. And now I run retreats with this company called the Medicine Connective. The Medicine Connective is ran by my friend Danielle and Lindsay. Danielle and I met at this retreat center where I went by KAJE. And so she introduced me to the Medicine Connective as KAJE. And so they all called me KAJE. Her son knows me as Auntie KAJE, right? Like that's just my name to them, which is totally fine. I love it. And then one day, about a year ago, actually, we were in Costa Rica, and Lindsay, and by the way, both Danielle and Lindsay are going to be on this podcast, so you'll get to meet them here soon. But one day we were in Costa Rica putting bags into the van, and Lindsay turned to me and she said, "Hey, KAJE, can you grab that bag?" And I was like, KAJE? I love that. I absolutely love that. I have wanted to use my name in my podcast and in my work for a while, but I just have a hard time identifying with the name Katie because it's so white. But I love the name KAJE. And when I introduce myself as KAJE, people are like, huh, that's weird. Like, you don't seem like someone who's very caged. But it's spelled with a K and a J, KAJE. So I ran with it. I've started to introduce myself as KAJE, especially in the ecstatic dance and dance fusion and Nevada City communities. I've just been introducing myself as KAJE because it resonates so much more with me. I actually, after this trip to Costa Rica, I ended up coming home to Truckee and having lunch with one of my neighbors, Matt, and he had a guest over. And I was like, "Oh, what's your name?" And she said, "My name is KAJE." And I was like, "No way. How do you spell it?" She was like, "It's KAJE. My initials are KJ. My name is Catherine," right? Like, it just vibrates with me more. And I was like, no way. I was literally just called KAJE for the first time a few weeks ago in Costa Rica. I just got back from this trip, and it just felt like a sign from the universe that this is actually a thing and a name that I could go by. And she, you know what she told me? She said, I looked up what the meaning of KAJE is, and she said, it's the highest level of ninja, and it's synonymous with the word shadow, which to me is absolutely incredible. The synchronicities are lining up so well. Y'all, if you don't already know, I have a panther tattooed on my left arm, and that panther has the name Shadow. Again, it's all lining up. So I went to AI. I asked, can you give me 10 podcast idea names that include my name, KAJE, make it witty, make it funny, make it this, make it that. And so it gave me a whole list of different names, and I resonated most with Kajeology. Ology is the study of. So to me, this podcast is the study of me. It's the study of the things that light me up. I'm going to bring on interviews and content that are all things that I'm using or investigating or learning or studying or what have you into this podcast. It's all about what is lighting up my curiosity. I'm going to have my friend Shelby, who is an influencer in the travel and adventure space. I'm going to have my friend Angel to come talk about womb wisdom. I'm going to have my friend Corey come in, talk about how she manifested, gosh, I can't remember exactly how much money it was. It's like $10,000 or $20,000 through her manifestation practices. I'm going to have my friend Demetra come in and talk about birth and womb wisdom as well. I'm going to have both Lindsay and Danielle come in and talk about travel and retreats and breath work and all the things. I mean, we are just going to be completely spread across the board. I'm going to have one of my former clients, Janice, come in and talk about her program Pivot Crew and what it's like to completely take a big pivot in your life, which is exactly what this podcast is. So lots of things coming. I'm going to have my Ayurveda teachers that I'm learning from at the California College of Ayurveda come in, and we're going to talk about different elements of healing and self-care and Ayurveda. All sorts of different topics are going to be included in this podcast. It's going to be the study of what lights KAJE up. I am so glad you're here. I am so blessed that you are still listening, that you're still right along here with me. It's a pleasure and a privilege to be on the mic again and to feel this level of excitement. I'll also mention I am doing a microdosing mushroom journey. It's a 70-day journey. It's 10 weeks long, and right now I'm on day 14. Some days I'm taking the microdoses. It's 100 grams of psilocybin. Sorry, not 100 grams. 100 milligrams of psilocybin. It's 100 milligrams of psilocybin. Some days are on days, some days are off days. Right now I'm on day 3 of on days, and then I'll have 3 days of off days. So I'll keep you all up to date on how this is going. But one of my intentions with this journey with the psilocybin is to reinvigorate my business again. And I already feel 14 days in, I already feel that level of excitement. I hope you can feel it through the mic. I hope you can feel my excitement because of this name change, because of the freedom that I'm allowing myself within the creative process, I feel so much more excitement about my work again. And I'm really grateful to be on this journey, to be working with my coach, Ann Britt, and to be diving deep into myself. So thank you for being along for the ride. Thank you for trusting me on this journey. I love you. I appreciate you. And I will catch you next time on the Kajeology podcast. Again, that's the Kajeology podcast. KAJEOLOGY. KAJEOLOGY. Catch you next time.